tracks, ballast, mountains, and more. I think it's time for a layout update. Hey guys, welcome back to Proper Chuffed. My name's Hilton and I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. That is half the fun of this, isn't it? And that whole idea of not knowing what I'm doing really applies here to my very first model railway layout. If you're new here or you haven't watched my update videos, this will be a whole new experience for you. And let me just explain quickly the idea behind this layout. Fictitious, set in the West Highlands of Scotland, and is a modern day preservation railway. On this railway, older sort of prototype locomotives that never saw the light of day, or into preservation rather, have been lovingly restored by the Dunromin railway community and brought back to life and now run on this line, which is obviously a heritage line. So it gives me a lot of room to play with different locomotives from different eras. It's really more than anything else just an excuse to run whatever the hell I want, to be honest. So my last update video, this was a bare bones sort of just track plan more than anything else. The track had been laid and I was ready to start moving on towards more detailing, ballasting, and essentially creating the skeleton of the landscape. And that's exactly where you join me today. As you can see, there's a hell of a lot going on here now, suddenly. We went from a white sort of foam baseboard into this very sort of, I suppose, brown and red and black color scheme. So I've been putting down my ballast. That was kind of the first port of call. I weathered my track and then I put down my ballast, and the only ballast that was available to me was a grey ballast, which is not exactly what I want. I know that in the West Highlands of Scotland, they often have a sort of red iron oxide ore color to the tracks. So what I've done is initially I tried a wash over them and it came out as a kind of pinky color, which I wasn't too fond of. And then I found a Tamiya can of sort of red iron oxide and I went over the tracks. Now I know it looks incredibly stark right now. It looks very, very red orange, and that's not exactly the final color I want to go with, but it serves as a sort of base color, and I'll be weathering the tracks with, you know, oil and grime and soot and coal and all sorts of things to kind of make it a little bit more lifelike and also mute down the colors with sort of dry brushing techniques. So hopefully don't get too alarmed. This is not the final color of the ballast. So I thought I'd just run through a couple things that have sort of changed on the layout. There are some rather dramatic mountains that have pitched up and numerous other things that I'd like to sort of touch base on and just show you where things are and how things are going. So one of the first things you're going to notice is that the Loco yard is now looking considerably better than it was previously. Obviously I have the Metcalf kits there, but what I've decided to do is kind of get down and dirty with the soot and the coal and the ballast and lay down a level of Hornby Scaledale Scenics that I think has brought together the yard in a sort of grimy, dirty way a little bit better now. Obviously, it's not quite there yet, but I think as a base level, it's looking quite good. I've used Hornby's range of Scaledale products here in the yard because they've got an sort of ashy, sooty mix of ballast that you can purchase and put down 2 bags of that in the yard, and I think it's done a good job of making it look quite grimy and messy. But on top of that, I've also added a layer of sort of black spray paint in certain areas just to give it a bit more depth before I start adding sort of oils and weathering powders on top of that to give it its final sort of look. Obviously the buildings themselves also need to be weathered at some point, but that's sort of a later project of mine. Right now I'm just kind of getting a look and feel and getting the base levels down. On the operator side of the table, you'll see that I have actually added an entire section here. This was previously sort of cut off just about here. That was the end of the baseboard, and I realized that I needed more room for a station, parking lot, and buildings and amenities. So I've decided to add this entire section on here, given it a paint over, and I'll be adding obviously the platform and then the station itself on top of that, all to fit in correctly. So we've got a nice little area for our visitors to arrive and take their trains from. To the rear of the layout, you'll see that 2 little mountains have sprung up. These I intend to be part of the scenic backboards and sort of blend into them a little bit more naturally. But as you can see, the one I've left a little bit more barren, whereas the other on the left-hand side has some nice rock faces I've made out of plaster. I've really enjoyed this process of making these plaster rocks, but I'll get into that a little bit later. Here's a view from the other end of the layout, obviously where the two little mountains are. And I think you can get a really good idea of exactly how the line leads up to the distillery from this angle. It's always quite difficult for me to kind of capture exactly where things are in position to everything else, but hopefully you have a fairly good idea of what's happening here. As you can see, there's a bridge that crosses over as that line leads up. Now, the idea behind that is that that line was previously disused and in sort of a poor state of repair, but it has been reactivated now that the line is focused on heritage railways and preservation and bringing tourists into the area. So that line, while looking a little bit sad, is still operational. So here's a view of the back of the mountain, and as you can see, it's a very rugged little line. It's obviously just a single line up and down, and the idea is that many years ago this was used to transport whiskey from the distillery back down to the bottom. It was then since disused and placed under sort of restrictions, and now it has been brought back to life by the Preservation Society and the distillery itself, who are now using it to transport whiskey down the hill and obviously bring tourists up. So what I did to create these rocks was I used plaster molds, stuck them all onto the back of the board here, and then I used these sort of offcuts or dried off pieces, smashed them up and then sprinkled them along the bottom to show years and years of sort of slow degradation of the rocks and give it a bit more texture and interest. And I think it's probably my favorite part of the layout so far. I really like the way this is all coming together. My intention is to dry brush these rocks, give them a bit more texture and angles, as well as adding moss and some sort of wet oils to it to kind of create the sense of a dampness on this line. A bit further right here, and you can see the 3 tunnel entrances. Now, the 2 tunnel entrances on the left are for the reverse loop. The idea behind that being is that I can push locos into there, store them, and then pop them out as if they've been on some kind of long journey. And then on the right hand side, we've got the double main line. Now, I haven't weathered any of this ballast yet. It's going to get that same iron oxide treatment, but the idea behind it is that the right hand line will obviously look a little bit newer than this left hand line. I think the left hand lines, I want to make them look as sort of dilapidated as possible. And as you can see, I've done the same method with the bits of offcuts of plaster, smashed them up and added them at the bottom of the tunnel portals where the rock faces are, just to give you that sense that time and weathering has continued and there's been a lot of sort of rockfall over that period. Further up the line towards the actual distillery station, this is a small little station which will serve as a cafe sort of area for tourists to come and enjoy the bounties of the whiskey workers. And then on the right hand side, which is kind of right now my storage / working table, will be the actual distillery itself, which is nicely sort of secluded in this little mountain range here. So the mountain is the sort of main focal landscape point of the entire layout, and the idea behind it is that it's a nice visual break between the 2 sides of the baseboard, servicing as obviously the line up to the distillery itself, but also just creating a little bit more visual interest. I wanted to have some rather large landscapes. Because we're in the West Highlands, I wanted some rough and big mountains, and I think obviously I'll have my scenic backboards which will do a lot of work for that, but this certainly adds to the entire idea behind it. To build this mountain, I used styrofoam boards, which I then shaped. I then used plaster of Paris bandages to cover the entire range itself. And finally, I used a plaster, Mod Podge, and paint mix to kind of give it a bit more texture. Since then, I've added maybe 3 or 4 layers of paint as like washes and added different colors. And well, you probably will never ever see that once the scenics and static grass is on. It's nice to know that the ground is completely covered in a brown, muddy color. The main tunnel entrance has been installed, obviously, as you can see, and I've also added some more rock features there. That will obviously all be covered in sort of moss and dampness as time goes on, but I think it's looking quite good already. And as you can see underneath, through the tunnel, the original ballast color, that light gray sticking out like a sore thumb. Obviously I'll finish that up and give it that iron oxide look too. On the left hand side is the diesel depot, a more modern structure, and I think the idea behind that is I'll have a nice concrete base, a bit more modern amenities, storage and fueling tanks, as well as the programming track, which, you know, on the left hand side door, the one that's closed, diesels can head straight out from there, straight through the points, onto the programming track where I can do any of my Loco programming quite easily at arm's reach. You may be wondering why these sheer faces are showing here. Now the idea is that I will use a sort of brick cardboard on these to give it a bit more of a modern feel, as if the mountain had to be held back by man. I like that idea. While everything around this layout is very rugged and natural, I just wanted one sort of man-made thing sticking in here like a sore thumb to show that man has been sort of pushing back against the natural wild. So I've been thinking a lot about the color schemes that I want to use on my landscape once I get to that point, and one of the things I was thinking about is having it set in fall. I've fortunately been to Scotland in fall, so I've seen those colors firsthand and I kind of know what I'm looking at. But I've also been looking at YouTube, and one channel I've found, which I posted recently on my community thread, is a YouTuber called Forward Signal. If you like watching trains run, and more specifically watching them run in Scotland, Forward Signal is your man. He often details what time trains come through, what they're pulling and where they are, and I find his content incredibly enjoyable to watch. He's given me a lot of great references to use while I'm building this layout, and I just wanted to direct you guys towards Forward Signal. If you like watching trains run, please do check him out. So color-wise, I've managed to pick up a kind of selection of fall colors, including a sort of straw grass, a deep green, a sort of burnt orange, and some brown dry grass, along with a selection of woodland scenic stuff, fall lichen, fall foliage, and of course a bit of yellow turf to go alongside that. So these are essentially the kind of colors I'll be working with on this layout. I don't want it to be too stark. I don't want the colors to be too severe or unrealistic. I will kind of mute down these colors as much as possible, but that's kind of the direction I'm heading in. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of exactly where I'm at with this layout right now. I'm perhaps moving a little bit too fast at times, and I do realize that I need to sort of slow myself down, slow down the excitement, and just kind of like work on individual things a little bit more, not to perhaps rush things too much. In addition to obviously working on the layout, I've also made a couple of acquisitions recently, some rather exciting, all of them rolling stock. Two of them being these West Highland line coaches from Bachmann. These are absolutely stunning. They came up on Facebook Marketplace the other day. They look fairly modern, I wouldn't say too old. They've got the NEM couplers and they are absolutely beautiful. I love this sort of cream and green livery that they have, and obviously they fit perfectly on my line. So very happy for our tourists on the line to be running around in these two coaches. Additionally, I managed to get all of this, which is an insane amount of rolling stock for £40. I couldn't believe the price on it when I was alerted by my friend Rinka. So I jumped on that and picked up all of this rolling stock too, which I'm very happy about. I've been looking forward to having some stuff to sort of shunt around the head shunts and move into the yard. So this will keep me very, very busy for the long term. But I still cannot find any grain hoppers. I cannot believe it. Like, I'm looking everywhere for grain hoppers, just can't find anything. I hope you guys enjoyed this recent update. I kind of try and keep these short and sweet just so you can kind of see where I'm going. Those of you who are interested, I know it's not normally my main content. I don't really focus on layout stuff. I focus on locomotives, which is really where my major interest is. But I have found myself thoroughly enjoying this process. I come from a bit of a model aircraft background, so to do something completely different like this, obviously there are certain skills you can carry across, which is lovely, but I'm really enjoying this sort of first experience with model railroading and building a layout. If you enjoyed this content, drop me a thumbs up, that would be greatly appreciated, and do let me know in the comments what you think about the layout and how it's progressing so far. Until I see you next time, keep your engines fired and stay on track. All the best.